Good afternoon. This is Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Susana Segat.
And I'm Robert Winters.
And we have a special guest today.
Hello, I'm Marc McGovern, Cambridge City Councilor.
So during the first half of the show, we talked a little bit about what it's like to be a brand new city councilor, although you really aren't because you had a lot of experience with the school committee. And then a couple of the issues that you thought were important to you. You know, when I was doing some research on your issues, I was looking at my Twitter stream of you, and I saw there was this one tweet that wasn't yours, but it struck me. It was a person was saying, I'm a pediatrician who, as a pediatrician who takes care of low-income children, it feels like the American dream is dying. So what is happening with poverty with children in the city? Do you have any sense of what's going on?
Yeah, so I think you know, I don't know, I'm a social worker, which is, my trade, and I've worked with special needs kids and kids from poverty and kids who struggled with abuse and neglect for over 20 years now, a lot of them from Cambridge. And it's funny, when people think about Cambridge, and going back to our last half hour, people think about Cambridge, they think of all this development and all this money and how expensive it is.
And that it's such a wealthy town.
It is such a wealthy town. I mean, all of which is true, but there's another story.
Yep.
And, the CDD just did a poverty assessment, if you will, of Cambridge. And 30% of the African American, of the black families, because it took into account not just African American but Caribbean, 30% are living below the poverty line, and 30% of our Latino families are below the poverty line, and
which is very low, right?
It uses the federal standards,
so
right?
Like 24,000.
So about for a family of four, it's about 24,000, and anybody living in Cambridge knows that a family of four cannot survive on 24,000. So the problem is actually much worse, I think, in Cambridge. And what's interesting, and what I learned a lot, I'm the chair of the Human Services Committee, and I've already held a couple meetings on poverty and hunger and brought professionals together, city people as well as nonprofits, to really start this conversation. And one of the things that they sort of encourage me to talk about is income insecurity, because when you say poverty, most people do not want to describe themselves as in poverty. And there are a lot of people who wouldn't fit the in poverty definition because of the federal guidelines. But there are a lot of people who are living with income insecurity, who are, a paycheck away, or not even a paycheck away, that are struggling with putting food on the table and taking care of their kids and clothing their kids and sheltering their kids, but wouldn't show up in a statistic about these people are considered poor. And we have a lot of those families here in Cambridge. And, it's funny, and maybe it's the way you frame the conversation, but the two human services meetings that I had on this subject, we get like 6 or 7 people. But if I held a meeting on a curb cut, I'd get 50.
Right.
So how do we elevate the conversation about poverty and hunger so that people in the city really take it in the serious way that I think it should be?
I don't think it's that people don't care or don't take it seriously. I think that it's a big discussion about how do we keep the middle class, how do we support the poor. That's a big deal here.
It is a big deal.
That they don't show up at meetings doesn't mean that they don't care.
Right.
But what is it that will give enough interest so that something will
And that's what I mean, but how do you frame it?
To move it.
Right, and how do you frame it? I mean, certainly people do care, but you have to go from the armchair quarterback of caring to action. And one of the things I want to do, we're going to be working on city council goals, is I want a city council goal to be that we're going to really tackle income insecurity in the city and have some set goals as to how we're going to move people out of poverty and out of income insecurity into really being more self-sufficient, and what that looks like. And because if we have a city council goal for it, then the budget is tied to the goals, and we can actually start being more intentional about attacking this issue.
Just touching a little bit what Susana just mentioned, that some of this is also a matter of modus operandi. I mean, if you're a person who's concerned about a curb cut or this, that, or the other thing, it may well be that your first line of action is say, I'm going to go to the city council, I'm going to do this, I'm going to organize a group of people, I'm going to have a rally, I'm going to do this and that. Whereas a lot of other people maybe because they're busy and working and they have
Right.
kids to take care of,
Right.
their first thought is, well, I better go get a second job or a
Right.
third job.
Right.
And then that's their form of
Absolutely.
activism.
Absolutely, and that, and that's something that we struggled with on the school committee, I think the city council struggles with it, is how, and this is why, on all issues, whether it's development or a curb cut or what have you, you have to be careful it's not just about the people who are in the room. Because the reality is there are far more people who aren't in the room.
And to your credit, you have been so consistent with that message from January through July at the city council.
Yeah, well, it's important, because otherwise you're governing, from a small group, and
Right.
and
reacting.
so how, there's a lot of people that don't have the time, the ability, the finances, the wouldn't even enter. They don't think the process is going to work for them, right? They're not.
They may not even know that there is
They
a
may not even know,
process.
right? Because
Right.
they're too busy trying to survive,
That's it.
and those people's voices are just as important as anybody else's,
Okay,
maybe
so-
more.
So say there is a process. Why don't you tell people what it is that they can do, or what it is that the city council is doing, or how do people get involved, or how do we do
Yeah,
this?
yeah. Well, certainly I think, and again, it's so easy to say, but so hard to do. I mean, I think what what I'm trying to do, and Dennis, Vice Mayor Benzan and I have, we kicked off our first neighborhood meeting together in Area 4, and we're trying to move our way through the city.
Now, because you're in a committee?
No, we're
You're
just
just
doing
doing
this.
it because you're doing
We're
it.
doing this, and
Actually, you and Dennis work very well together.
we do. I mean, we've Dennis
wait,
and I
just
have
in-
very we're Cambridge kids, and
That's
we're
it.
close in age, and we've known each other a long time, and
you-
we're from essentially opposite ends of Central Square, and so we have a lot in common.
Okay, so just in terms of process here, you two as counselors are going out into the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
How does that relate to the city council and the committees and all the work that's official and supported?
Yeah, and I don't want Denise, Councilor Simmons, Councilor Toomey. I think
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I don't want
everyone
to suggest that
cares
it's
about this
just
But you guys are the
Council-
new
Vice
guys.
Mayor
You're
Benzan
the
and I
new
are-
guys.
Yeah.
Most of the councilors really do this, and it's a way to help us engage with people who wouldn't normally come to City Hall. Now, a lot of times at these meetings, you get the same people that come to City Hall come out to these meetings.
Right.
So you have to dig even deeper and say, what do you do? And a lot of it is
Right.
just walking around the community and going up and talking to people. So what I would advise people to do is, all the city councilors, we're local people, right? This isn't like going
Yeah.
to talk to a state senator or not even a state senator, a senator in Washington, or the president or the governor. I mean, we all live here. We're listed. Where you can find us. Don't be afraid to just say, hey, counselor, this is on my mind.
Just grab 'em on the street.
Grab 'em on the
Say
street.
what? Say what?
Well,
Say
I'm
I know
concerned
neighbors
about.
that
Yeah,
making it.
look, I'm having a hard time.
Give 'em the lowdown.
I'm having a
Yeah.
hard time supporting my family. One of the things that I enjoy the most about this job is this constituent work to help people. I had a woman who was 73 years old, lived in the same house for 40 years. The house was sold. The landlord gave her a few months to get out. This is where she lived her whole life. No family around, did not know what to do, and I took her to CEOC, the Cambridge Economic Opportunity Committee, to work on filling out a housing application. She listed the 3 places she wanted to live. I then drove her to those 3 places so that she could look, so I could look at it with her.
On the job.
It's that is like for
Did
me,
she
it's
get
the
a
best
place?
part. They're in process, and she's gonna get one before she leaves,
Good.
and they're gonna help her with the landlord to know her rights and be able to get her to stay there longer. So those are things that I only knew about that because she felt comfortable approaching me, right?
But people can do that with their city council.
Yeah, absolutely. And if possible, there's emails, there's phone calls. We do read all the emails that come through. There's phone calls, and certainly coming to meetings is important. But I think for folks who don't have the time to do that, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call any one of us, or grab us when you see us on the street and tell us your story.
I think it's probably worth noting that a lot of people who probably wouldn't feel as comfortable talking about something at a meeting, but they'd be perfectly happy to talk to
Absolutely.
you.
It's a lot to
one-on-one.
get up there, and especially when it's your own personal
That's
life, and you're
right.
going to say
Right.
that in front of the whole community.
That's exactly right.
That's.
Well, I know that on the school committee, our issue was a while back, that we had free and reduced lunch for kids, but a lot of them didn't want to take it because they
Right.
didn't want the stigma.
Right.
That we didn't want people to think differently of
Yep.
them.
Yep.
I was talking to a friend of mine who was saying that in Somerville this summer, that at every a governmental agency, at lunchtime, they bring lunch for kids. Whether they can afford it or not, everyone gets a lunch.
Mhm.
And that's one way to feed the kids without the stigma attached.
Right, right. I would love to see the schools do, you know, free lunch and breakfast for everybody. Because I think you,
No, but
again,
in the
you.
summer is when
Well, in the
kids
summer we
suffer.
do have, in the summer we do,
What
the
do we
city
have?
does, the city has a program that's federally funded where they give out lunches to really anybody who shows up, and they go to the different parks around the
Parks,
city. They're also at the youth centers in the city, and I mean, it's thousands of lunches that they give out over the course of the summer. So,
We are so lucky to have some of the people we have working for human services in the city.
you know, the services that we have in the city, I think that's the part that it's in some ways is frustrating, is because we do so much and yet there's still so much more to do, and you sort of feel like, God, you know, we should be able to kind of wrap this all up and do this. And I mean, we're not these other communities that don't have the manpower or the person power. They don't have the will or the money. You know, we have all of that, and yet we're still kind of trying to figure out how we serve everybody.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I think we do a great job.
Well, thank you for paying attention to that issue, because that is a really big issue to a lot of people.
it's really why I ran. You know, I mean, it's how do we, you know, how do we help our most vulnerable people in our community, and that is to me a real sign of what kind of community you are. And it's something I've committed my life to through social work, and now want to do it through policy.
And there's one thing, it's not so much on the hunger front, I guess they're all related, but one big issue I know when Denise Simmons was having was it a housing committee meeting there, there was a lot of discussion about what's really been a long-term problem, is expiring youth housing.
Yeah.
There are some big ones, I believe, this year or within the next year or so that are set to expire. And for those that don't know, and you can help me out on this, there were housing that was built some number of years ago with some sort of federal funding. There was some understanding it would then be available for people of, you know, fixed incomes and whatnot, but it was not forever. So there comes a point where the term has expired, and then whoever the owner is could potentially just put it all to market rate.
Right.
And, and the city has been successful in securing some
Some
of
of it.
those, and not all, but we do have some big ones. Do you
Yeah.
offhand what some of the?
So right now, Preston Arms, which is about, I think it's 173
Which is Preston
units.
Arms
It's
again?
down sort of behind Danahy Park, down
Yep.
Garden Street. You come around that
It's
funky
right in
corner.
right in the Bandit Garden.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's up now.
Mhm.
And so the city's looking at that. In fact, Councilor Simmons and I had an order on asking the city to look at, you know, purchasing that or working with people to purchase that and keep it
And the Affordable Housing Trust is very much on the case here,
Yes.
wanting to do this if
Yeah.
possible.
But it's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
Total. I mean, not just that building in particular, but Ringe Towers, right? 2 of the 3 towers are 2020 is when they're slated to no longer be affordable. Or at
All the
least
units?
it's about 500,
Wow.
give or take, units. So actually, I had to leave that housing committee meeting because I had previously set up a meeting at Ringe Towers with those residents to talk about it. So I was
Yeah.
still doing housing, but I had to leave that meeting.
Are they worried?
They're very worried, very worried. And you know, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars probably when you look at the whole picture. And so this is, you know, when we talk about affordable housing, and I talk to experts about what do we do, the first thing everyone says to me is you've got to preserve what you have,
That's the main thing.
right?
We-
And then it's about adding more and how you do it. And
We celebrate every time we can build 10 units of affordable housing through the Affordable
Oh,
Housing
yeah.
Trust or some other means. And it's not cheap. Every unit is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit cost to do these things here. So if you're trying to celebrate building 12 new ones and then
Right.
you
You
lose
lose
600
500.
right, exactly.
existing ones, that's a
Exactly.
big
Where do
deal.
those people go? You know, and
Right.
so preservation is key.
So how do you do that? You negotiate with the landlord to continue,
Yeah.
to extend the deadline?
Yeah, you negotiate. You look at if the landlord is sort of, you know, dead set on selling. You know, you look at ways in which the city can partner with other, you know, nonprofits that manage affordable housing.
Are there some state laws about like right of first refusal? Must
Yeah.
they first allow the municipality to bid on it or
Yeah.
whatever?
Oh,
Well,
so
they-
you'd have to buy it?
Well, you can't
could
take
they-
You can't, right, I mean, so.
No, so right now, you're renting in these places, right?
Right.
Or you're, okay, and so they say, the cheap rent is gone, it's going up to market levels.
Yeah.
So the city would just buy it away from the landlord?
Well,
What is, I don't understand.
So something like Preston Arms, I mean, does the city buy that property?
Buy the whole
The
thing?
whole thing?
And what,
Does the city partner with someone else, right? I mean, the city doesn't wanna be in the business of being a landlord necessarily, you
the
know?
housing authority.
But the housing authority, and that's, I mean.
but the landlord can say, I don't wanna sell it, I just
Right,
wanna
so,
make a
so,
profit,
so,
right?
so the law was that the cities used to have, right of first refusal sort of automatically, and they've changed that.
Oh.
Now, with some of,
If it's up for sale.
if it's up for sale, but with
Okay.
some of our
Is that a
agreements.
state law or federal law?
I believe it's state,
Okay.
and, but, I could be wrong about that, but I
Why
believe
would
it's
they
state.
change that?
But with Ringe Towers, the agreement that was entered into with Ringe Towers is that the city does have the right of first refusal and the right to match.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of because one of the things that we struggle with is, a private developer can come in and say, here's a check for $100 million, where the city can't really do that.
So you have the right to
So-
match that, but you
so,
don't want to match that.
so we sometimes get not only outbid, but we sometimes don't even get a toe in the water because
Yeah.
a private developer can just come in and throw cash on the table. So having the right of first refusal is huge.
Right. We have a lot more flexibility now because we have the Affordable Housing Trust, but I mean, you don't have to go through a whole big public procurement process. It's a bit different then, but the thing is they're limited. It's not like they've got an infinite supply of cash.
Right. So it is, all this stuff is, this stuff is starting to bubble up over the next couple of years, so.
So these are,
Well, that's serious business.
It is.
so in the crystal ball of looking for the next year and a half of this council term and beyond, I imagine this particular issue, something isn't going away.
No, it's not going away, and I think I certainly don't like to speak for everybody on the council, but I think in this regard, I'm pretty confident that we're all very much
People
concerned about this.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a councilor on there that isn't worried about what would happen
Mm-hmm.
to these folks, should we lose that housing, so.
Right. Well, trying to replace it would just be prohibitively expensive as well.
Right.
So just from an economic point of view, if there's any way feasible way to make this, have this be preserved, that's definitely in the city's best interest.
Absolutely.
Even to an economic conservative, it would be so.
Yeah, no, and it's part of, and that's the other important part of, an exciting part of being on the council is to, the council gets to be involved in figuring out and making decisions about who gets to live in this city, right? And as much as we stand up for folks who have income insecurity, who can't afford the $3,000 a month rent, we get to make some decisions that hopefully result in those folks getting to live in what I think is the greatest city around. So it's important conversation.
Any compromise, I think, that deals with the landlord and makes them feel like they weren't cheated, and deals with the tenant and makes them feel like they weren't cheated is really good.
Mm-hmm.
Some good compromise is good.
Now, a kind of related matter, and I was actually at a meeting with some other group last night and kind of was embarrassed, realized, oh geez, I'd forgotten all about that, was that there was a council order and a process that's been going about what they call a nexus study that would affect what they call the linkage fee. So now this is basically the core idea, and correct me if I mess it up here, but is that when new commercial development is built, there's a presumption that there's an impact in terms of the local housing stock. It puts more pressure, so they were required to pay a certain linkage fee per, square foot, something like that. And that it hasn't been updated in, 15 years?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Something like that. So and in fact, there was even a recommendation to jump it from 458 to 783, but that was like 12 years ago.
Right.
It wasn't done.
Right.
I don't understand why it wasn't done, but it wasn't done. So now another 12 years have passed, so presumably if you were to update it, it would go to an even higher fee.
Right.
Where's that stand?
So I think that, I can't speak
And this is to support housing primarily.
Right. So, why it wasn't done over time, I can't say. I think a lot of it had to do with the economy. I mean, let's remember that there was the economy was not in good shape not that long ago. And so adding additional cost to development would have prohibited development, and the council and the city did not want to do that.
At the
So,
time.
so at the time, and so I think that that was probably the main reason why they didn't look at raising it. But again, we're in a different situation now. And so the one question that is still out there is you can only raise the linkage fee once in 3 years, every 3 years. So there was an order put in by Councilor Carlone and Mazin suggesting that we raise the linkage fee to
Sort of, and is an interim
as
measure?
an interim measure while this is going on. And
But that doesn't
but then
apply.
but then and I don't know how much we were all aware of that. And then it came to our attention that you can only do this every 3 years. So if we do it now and the Nexus, we raise it to $8, and the Nexus study comes out and says actually it should be 15,
right.
then we gotta wait.
Then you're stuck with 3 years.
So we're trying to. So I think there's can we do it as an interim
So-
and then do it
so-
again, or
so-
do we just wait?
So perhaps calmer heads will prevail
Yeah.
here and we'll get something
Yeah,
good.
I
Why is it taking so long to do this Nexus study?
Um,
I'll do it. I'll be back.
It has taken a long time, but they're working on it. And this is the thing.
Come on.
Let's remember that there's a
Government works
lot,
slowly on purpose.
but there's a lot going on in the city, right?
Yeah.
And I think people sort of, sometimes if they care about the Nexus study, they say, why isn't this done? Well, they're doing 17,000 other things too, and
Yeah.
so. Unfortunately, it doesn't always move as quickly as we would like. But this has taken a long time.
Just
All right,
round down a little
This
bit.
has taken
move
a-
it along.
Before-
I'd like to have seen this sooner than.
Before we
than
run
it
out
is.
of time,
Yeah.
there's a question I really need to ask you.
Okay.
So when people who are on the school committee, sometimes they look at the city council and say, the school committee's ours, you ran for city council issues, school issues are our issues, hands off.
Yep.
Okay, so now you're on the other side. You're on the city council. How much did you micromanage the school stuff as a council? How does that work? How did you feel about it in the first term?
I have tried very hard not to do that.
Well, in general, not just you, but in general. How does it work?
We have to be disciplined, right? And you have to understand what the role of the council is. So, certainly I was the finance chair. There was certainly a role for the council to play around finances. But again, it's a specific role. It's to approve the entire budget. It is not to say we like this program or we don't like that program.
Okay.
So some of it is discipline. It's
And how'd you do on that?
I
Not
think
you, the
no.
whole
I think
council.
so far we've done pretty
Good.
well.
The council.
The council.
I want to emphasize, an individual counselor technically can do very little.
Yes, I think
But
the council.
five
I think
can do
right.
much.
And but then also, how do we sort of
Yes.
work with each other and
Yes.
say,
Yeah.
and I think it was funny because when I was chairing the school committee budget meeting, it was definitely felt different being on one side of the table
was
than
that
the other
like?
side of the table. Well, it didn't hurt as much where I was sitting now. Than,
Yeah.
I think but that goes a lot to what that relationship is like, and this because you were there, right? And I've been saying to folks on the council, look, we keep saying we want a close relationship with the school committee and we want to work together. These are all our kids, but yet. My experience on the school committee when we go to a round table with the council is we sit there and we get kicked in the teeth for 2 hours
Yep.
and told how we're doing everything terribly wrong by people who don't really know what we're doing. And
right.
until that culture changes,
Yeah.
there's not going to be that relationship. So the council really has
So
to be
what
careful
happened with that,
with
that discussion?
about the round tables.
Yeah.
We haven't had as many of
Oh.
them as so far.
That's an
as-
excellent
as,
thing.
solution.
You solved the
but
problem.
but everything from I said we should alternate. That we do the Sullivan Chamber one, and then we go to the school committee.
Well,
And
except
And
that
the
now,
school
there
committee-
is no Sullivan
there is no
Chamber
Sullivan Chamber for a while.
while.
But it's how do you have a respectful, equal conversation rather than
Yeah.
how do I get on my soapbox and because education's a hot issue.
So it's
and,
all about
you know,
turf.
It's sometimes
Well,
There
it's
you
just
go.
like the school committee going to the city council at a round table and complaining about how the city council does their work.
Right.
Yeah,
You know?
right.
It's like, that would
the
go
lack
over well.
the lack of affordable housing in the city directly impacts
Affects
the
the
schools,
schools.
but never has the school committee filed an order saying, why isn't the city council doing more for
About
affordable
affordable
housing?
housing.
But there are counselors who don't think twice about saying, well, why isn't the
Right.
superintendent
Yeah,
doing this?
It's an interesting
You
dynamic.
know, it's a very interesting dynamic. Yeah.
Right.
So thank
yeah.
you for bringing it up with your colleagues
Yeah,
and talking
no.
about it.
Actually, one last little thing on the housing. We only have a couple of minutes here. It's amazing how time flies.
It does.
But we right now have an inclusionary zoning ordinance that calls for 15% of bonus, I think, is that right?
Right.
But you do that, but then when you do the math, you get
Right.
for projects over 10 units, you get an extra bonus, but you also get to do a market rate. So it actually ends up being closer to 12%.
Right, so,
But there's been some discussion of changing it.
right, so roughly, if you were gonna build 100 units, you would think 15% of 100, will get 15 affordable units. But there's a bonus where you take 100 units, if 15 of them are gonna be affordable,
You
the
get another
developer
15.
actually is allowed to
You get
build an
more.
additional 15. So it's really 15
You get
units
nothing.
on 115 units,
Exactly.
which drops it. So yes, there is talk, and there needs to be preserving expiring use, affordable housing,
Most important.
most important, but also raising the inclusionary zoning, and I don't know what that number is.
And it's a difficult question because that's more density
It's-
and people get very upset.
People, but you know what?
Yes.
You've got to set priorities, right?
That's right.
And you know what? I will take a building that's a little taller than what I might personally like if that means that I'm going to get 10, 15, 20, 30 more affordable units, and that many people
And-
can afford to live in the
Right.
city.
And that's the trade-off.
And that's the trade-off. And you have to make trade-offs. You know, my other plan is that we invade Belmont and take all their land, but you know, unless
I'm big on
unless we do
annexation.
that,
Annexation, let's-
unless we do that, we are a small city, we are a dense city, and you have to deal with the confines that you have, and you can't sit back and say, oh, I wish people say Paris, you know, I wish we were Paris where everything could, we're not Paris, we're 6 square miles, we can't,
In that
what's
spirit-
possible there is not possible
In
here.
that spirit, actually, at some of the master plan pre-meetings, I've been basically emphasizing that we need to do things a little more regionally, and maybe we ought to get together and have Cambridge and Somerville and some
Yeah.
others actually get.
Well,
Absolutely.
at our next meeting, in our next show,
Absolutely.
we will have the state rep from Belmont coming to fight all of your arguments about
There we
taking
go.
over.
Anyway,
I'm kidding, I don't want to take over
We're
Belmont.
so
We're-
happy that you came to our show.
It's-
This is
pleasure.
Councilor Marc McGovern.
And until next week, this has
This
been Cambridge
in
Inside.
Cambridge Inside Out.